Okay, good morning, ladies. We're on part 2 of a Hasidic discourse by Rabbi Ginzburgh called I Am Asleep, Yet My Heart is Awake. And we're going to be doing a review of last week, plus adding additional material. And then I hope we'll finish most of the end of the discourse. It's a very beautiful discourse about the empowerment of the depth of the Jewish heart. So we'll do some summary notes now. Last week, we started learning about the Jewish heart and its hidden potency to pierce through any darkness, including exile. And this, as I said, is the Hasidic discourse by Rabbi Ginsburgh entitled, I Am Asleep, Yet My Heart is Awake, which is a pasuk from Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, and that's the source guide for the classes. So let's consider a phrase from Chazal, which says, words that come from the heart enter the heart. This is something we've heard before. Words that come from the heart enter the heart, referring to another person's heart. Really, what does this mean? All right? So in order to understand this, we have to go into some background information. And the background information comes from the level of what we call the divine channels of consciousness, the Sefirot, particularly the level of Sefirot that's called Bina, understanding. Bina is the energy that is the key to understanding the heart. And we learned last week that Bina is called the face of the mother. And the mother in the channels of divine consciousness is, of course, the one that gives birth to what? To the heart and all of its emotions. So this concept Bina, which we call understanding in the intellectual capacity, gives birth to all the emotions of the heart. And Bina is associated with the soul power of conceptual analysis and the power to grasp newly surfacing ideas. As ideas come into our world from divine consciousness and we try to understand them, they sort of come in, but they can also float right out. Grasping them, analyzing them, examining them, and being able to hold on to them is that Bina understanding energy. And this facet of understanding of Bina that we're talking about, grasping the ideas and examining them, is called Tevuna. It's the power to integrate understanding into the heart. It's actually the lower power of Bina. The higher power is called Ima, the higher power, but the lower power and the more essential power that our intellect relates to and gets fed from is called Tevuna, which is the power to integrate understanding into the heart. So this points out that when we're talking about the heart, that the source point that actually is above it and beyond it is really the intellectual power of understanding. So to understand the heart, though, we need to look at the essential emotion of the heart. The essential emotion of a Jewish heart is called love. As the Rebbe says, love is the transcendence of the soul over the body. There's a quote from the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, love is the transcendence of the soul over the body. I'm going to read you a few quotes from a book called Towards a Meaningful Life about love. Something we all want to learn more about so that we can emanate it and be like God. Love is the single most necessary component in human life. It is both giving and receiving. Love allows us to experience another person and lets that person experience us. Love is the origin and the foundation of all human emotion and interaction. To live a meaningful life, we need to learn more about love and how to manifest it in our lives. True love, the essence of what we really want to call godly true love that exists in our heart, is transcendent, linking our physical selves to God and therefore to everyone around us. So this is an important point to understand, that love is not merely an emotion, it's a godly power that is transcendent. What does it transcend? It transcends our materialistic existence and goes into a godly kav, influences our whole life from this godly level. Right? The wisdom of God is intended to do one thing: to teach us how to love, to teach us to transcend our material boundaries and reach a more spiritual, enhanced place. Such a journey is only made through the soul, and love is the language that we need to learn and use and speak along the way. So that's a definition from Towards the Meaningful Life of what is love. Now we're going to continue to be able to understand this concept of love, and we're going to do a review of what we actually, a brief review of what we learned last week to bring us all into sync. So inside the discourse, I am asleep, yet my heart is awake, we learned a few key ideas. We learned that in exile, in the darkness of reality, the Jewish soul is always asleep. And it says we don't see, we don't experience clearly the signs of God. What are those signs of God that we don't perceive or understand or receive clearly? They're the messages of divine guidance and truth that are hidden behind the veil of darkness in reality. Therefore, because we don't see them, we don't perceive the divine truth and the guidance of God's messages, therefore we're in a state of spiritual exile, which is likened to sleep and lacks an awareness of godliness and has a distortion of true reality, rather like fragments of a dream. Yet inside the inner essence of my heart, of all of our hearts, which is called in Yiddish the Pintel Yid, it's awake. What's awake? The inner spark of eternal connection with God is ever awake. That which is a constant flame of love and devoted connection with God that can never be extinguished. And in this, the heart beats in a continuous motion of run and return, what's called ratzov v'shuv. So again, what is the heart awake to? The heart is awake to godliness. The heart, the inner part of the heart core, is never severed, is always eternally connected, and in a level of a flame of love and devotion and bonding with godliness. And that is never extinguished. That's why the heart is always awake. But that's on an inner level, and it's hidden to us to a certain extent, because the exterior part of us is asleep in exile, in the darkness of exile, not perceiving the godly messages and the godly truth and the godly light, the real reality, not the external reality we see out there. That's a whole veil that's hiding godliness, the truth of godliness. God has mercy on us, Baruch Hashem. God brings us an awakening. This is all a review from last week, from the beginning of the discourse. God brings us an awakening and returns our consciousness in the act that we call tshuva, to return. And this begins our journey with an arousal from above. The arousal is initiated by God because God brings us the awakening through Rahmanis, through mercy. And it's likened to that God is knocking at our door to awaken us and arouse us from our slumber. God has mercy on the exiled soul, buried in the darkness and existential pain of our world. And God causes a ray of divine light, which we're calling awakening, to shine from where, even though it's from above, meaning it's from the essence of the Godhead, where does it start? Where does the awakening start? This is really fascinating. It starts at that innermost point of the heart that we've been talking about. That very core essential part is where this awakening begins from, because God causes a ray of divine light of awakening to shine inside the depth of my heart into the innermost point of the heart's flame, which then rises up into the consciousness of our mind and illuminates our mind with awareness of God. So that's a very interesting journey, that the illumination, the awakening from God enters the innermost point of our soul, our heart core, and that radiation of illumination of divine light then shines up. It rises us up and begins to illuminate what we call our consciousness, right? Our mind, and also our whole being, our entire being. With what? With an awareness of God and godliness in life. It's like waking up from sleep, being awakened from sleep, right? So the heartbeat, that concept called ratzov v'shov, run and return, we can sense in two ways. Remember we said this? The first way is through learning Torah and doing mitzvot. And that's the heart of coming into knowing God, that the awareness becomes and consciousness of godliness becomes increased of the heart, of this first awakening of the heart, by learning Torah and doing mitzvot. This is the channel through the deepening of the heart and consciousness of the mind and our being. But there's another level that the discourse reveals of how we are awakened, and that's through nature. And it's called hashgacha pratis, divine providence. And this was likened to the heart as it is a pulse in the body, like in your wrist or in other places. The essence of the heart also flows throughout the body, and there are pulses that one can pick up if you are a specialist kind of rofei, and you can pick up pulses. And the pulse of the heart, according to this arousal to godliness and mindfulness and consciousness, lies in divine providence, hashgacha pratis. So both ways, learning Torah, doing mitzvot, doing tefillah, being immersed in godliness in our avodah, and the awakening to divine providence, hashgacha pratis, is part of how we awaken our consciousness from our heart to godly purpose. Godly purpose meaning our purpose. Our purpose is tied up with God. Through God's mercy, when we become awakened, when we take to heart, isn't that an interesting statement that we've heard before? When we take to heart the true messages from the inner point of our heart, which is awake, when we start to take it to heart, our whole consciousness gets raised and turned towards God and our soul's mission and our divine purpose in life. And there is an awakening in our whole being to godliness, right? And then we become mindful. We actually become a mindful, conscious heart and person with a fiery love for God, because the flame that was on the inner core that was hidden gets revealed, it gets fanned, it gets opened up, and it illuminates all of our being. And it helps us to invest our personal energy and our commitment every day. So taking it to heart means to activate and rejuvenate our heart so that we can apply the depth of what Chassidus teaches us. Yet my heart is awake, awakens the mindfulness of our heart and soul to always be connected with God and to be ever ready. That's the inner point of the heart. The heart, even though that inner core is never severed from God and is always a flame that's lit and burning, but it could be hidden, it's ever ready. It's constantly in service, even in a hidden manner. It's ever ready to leap forward in our actual service to Hashem with a passion and an involvement on our part. in a godly conscious life. Let's now return to the discourse. That was the review where we left off. And we said that open to me in the Song of Songs, the level open to me means that Hashem is likened to a groom who is knocking on our heart's door, like knocking on the door of his bride. And what has to happen? The knocking on the door by Hashem, the groom, is to awaken. But what do we have to do? We on Israel are considered the bride in this poem by Song of Songs, Shir Shirin. We have to rise up. That takes a certain amount of willpower. We have to rise up from our slumber and our sleepy state. And we have to do what? We have to open the door. We have to actually go open the door and ourselves to all the godly possibilities and purposes that God has in mind for us on a daily basis, at least on a daily basis. We have to open that door. That's called the arousal from below, us rising up, opening the door, just doing that stage. And then the stages of love and the building of godly consciousness go on 4 levels. They're called my sister, my companion, my dove, my perfect one. We'll do a little review. We're going to go a little bit inside also. My sister, we said, is sibling love, which is likened to water, a love which is instinctive, which is natural, and which is constantly flowing like a spring of enlivening water. Sibling love is always there like water. It's constant, it's flowing, it's natural, it's instinctive. It's inside of us, this sibling love. And we have this sibling love for Hashem and with Hashem that never extinguishes. It's always there. And it's enlivening to us, but we have to actually awaken it. We have to actually come to it. This is the first stage of love with God, this concept that's called my sister. Then it goes to the next level, my companion. Okay, my companion is the married couple. And this love is called the fiery love, as opposed to the sibling love, which is water. Love like fire. A fiery love is born from contemplation of God and meditating on God's greatness. Let's read some of this from inside. This is where we left off. My companion describes a closeness between marriage partners, which follows the sibling-sister relationship. This state of love, as opposed to being natural, intuitive, and constant, is born anew in the heart through experiencing divine light by contemplation and meditation. What do we have to do? We have to actually activate our processes of contemplating Hashem's goodness and greatness and omniscience, right? It says, and you shall know this day, and you shall return and draw down into your heart that God is the Almighty in the heavens above and on the earth below, and there is no other. Newborn love, fiery love, expresses the element of fire in the soul, which is different from the instinctive, natural, calm love of water. In Hebrew, the word companion means being sustained or provided for. In the Zohar, we find a very interesting phrase. Am Yisrael sustains her father in heaven. What does that mean? It means that our efforts of meditation and godly consciousness actually, and our performance of Torah and mitzvot is compared to the effect of food on the body. It provides energy that binds the soul in an integral unity. So this second part, my companion, is more activated. It requires effort on our part to contemplate and meditate and really go into and begin to learn the depth of Torah and to do mitzvot. The beginning and the entrance into all of these ways that Hashem provides us to have a relationship actually bring us into unity and are almost like food that provides energy. Through Torah and mitzvot, Israel provides the food which binds together two aspects of godly light. The godly light that fills the worlds and the godly light that surrounds the worlds. And these two forms of light radiate from God into creation all the time. So we have the first level of the light, which is immanent and perceptible on every level of creation, and so in every soul. And this light radiates according to the capacity of the vessel. That's us receiving it. The second level of light, makif, the surrounding level, is the light that is uniformly present in all the worlds, and the light is hidden, and it's transcendent, and it comes to us really through our superconsciousness, which is also always radiating messages and light to us, but we're not as conscious of it. These two forms of light are called mamale kolamim and solev kolamim, literally filling worlds and surrounding all worlds. Just as below the soul shines into the body, so above transcendence permeates the world. So this transcendent makif, or what's called sovev kolamim, surrounding all the worlds, this divine light of God permeates all the worlds and also comes into our consciousness. And the soul experiences this as a unity of infinite and finite. We actually experience this level of light coming in through our learning, through our connection, through our devotion, through our meditation, our contemplation. Our mindfulness of godliness begins to bring about a unity of the infinity of Hashem into our finite world. The Jews' performance of Torah and mitzvos releases sparks of good from their state in the lower material reality, which then rise to their ultimate source in this higher level of solev kolamim, surrounding, and arouse the transcendent light to descend and come into the immanent light, meaning our world. So there's a process going back and forth. There's a flow going back and forth. Us doing Torah and mitzvos releases sparks. Those sparks rise up and they begin to connect with the unity of God's essence. And then they move God to then begin to a more intense flow. It's always happening, the superconscious flow of Shefa from Hashem, but it moves God almost like a motivation to bless us and increase the Shefa, the multitude of the divine light that's coming into the world. And this is called sustenance, our sustenance. So that's the idea of the fiery love that we work on. Now, Shir Shirim goes further. It calls another level of love that we are likened to my sister, my companion, my dove. Let's look at doves. You know, a bird, the doves. Doves are considered the most loyal mates of all creatures in nature. Their instinctive loyalty is expressed in that they're always gazing at each other. Doves mate with only one dove for a lifetime. They never remate. They are considered the loyal example within nature. Mated doves continually gaze upon each other, never tiring of the pleasure of beholding the other dove. For the soul, this level of doves is a state of serving God that is called to gaze at the splendor of the King. This is now a level completely beyond my sister, my companion. To be at the level of my dove is called to gaze at the splendor of the King. This is above and removed from the level of thought, the inner eyes of the mind and the heart, behold the pleasure and splendor of the King in his infinite greatness and beauty until the mind and heart merge in complete selflessness. There's a key there, the word selflessness, betul. There's a certain merging and unity that takes place with godliness that is represented by our being so given over to godliness and our divine mission that the merging that starts to happen is one that really requires betul, selflessness on our part. Selfless pleasure is perpetually new, as opposed to self-oriented pleasure. When we're in a selfless state of gazing at the splendor of God, this is called the level of my dove. And it appears to be somewhat different from the properties of my sister or my companion. But in fact, what it does is it actually unites them both, interestingly enough. The selflessness of being bonded to Hashem and really desiring with all one's being to be united with Hashem. And we do experience this periodically. We're supposed to experience this level when we're davening, when we're saying the Shema, or we're in the standing Amida, the Shemona Esrei, to be really nullified to Hashem. We experience this on Shabbat, when Hashem raises us up to a much higher level and enhances our soul with greater perceptiveness of perceiving the godliness in the world. The love represented by the phrase of my dove is both constant, like continuous instinctive love, and at the same time, it's a burning love, a burning fiery love expressed in my companion. This is the ability to unify water and fire, and it depends upon our level to be selfless, to enter into a level of betul, which is innate to every soul of every Jew, but it demands giving oneself over. It demands much more concentrated mindfulness and work on our part. And we do this certain periods of time in our davening and in our service to Hashem. It's good to be mindful enough to really try when you're davening, or to really try when you're learning at some point, at some smaller corner, to really completely reach a place of selflessness. Sometimes Hashem presents us even with a test, a nisyanot, in order to bring this level out in a Jewish person, in order that we become selfless. We become completely attached to Hashem through this betul, and sometimes it's the ray of light is coming in a different manner that we would call a test, but it brings out this very intense level, which is called to gaze at the splendor of the King. Now you might wonder what could be beyond that. So we come to the perfect one, and this is very interesting. My perfect one, which is called Tamiti, I'm just going to give a summary, then maybe go inside. Here, the Jew is devoted and perfect in their relationship with God and in illuminating godliness into all life, even beyond themselves. And once we are perfected that, which is really the state that we just read of the dove, my perfect dove, right? The perfect one, Tamiti, once we've become completely connected to Hashem, we must now turn our focus outward and bring this divine consciousness into the world. I'm quoting now the book, and I'll go into it a little bit. After beholding with wonder and pleasure the splendor of the one King, one must turn now to the worldly reality to bring unity and illumination and awareness to the world. When Am Yisrael enters this work, this avoda of the ratzon of God, the will of God, then Hashem calls us my perfect one. I'll just read that again. After beholding with wonder and pleasure the splendor of the one King, one must turn back into the world reality, or maybe we should say turn forward into the world reality, to bring unity and illumination and awareness of godliness to the world. When Am Yisrael enters into this work, this avoda of the Ratzon, the will of God, then Hashem calls us my perfect one, right? So the Jew reaches the highest level of service in what's called tamiti, my perfect one. When he perfects his relationship with God in the world, when we work on perfecting our relationship, and this may sound like maybe a tzaddik, but in fact, we're learning in the Torah right now that the Beinoni can reach beyond where the tzaddik could go, because the tzaddik by nature is like this. But the Beinoni in their striving and in their struggle is so precious to Hashem that it even actually is, in a sense, a higher level of service. And since we're all meant to try to be like the intermediate one, the working servant of Hashem, so it means that we're always trying to unify with Hashem and connect with Hashem in deeper, ever-evolving ways, and to be really awake, with an awakened heart that illuminates the consciousness of the mind, and it makes our whole being receptive to receiving the constant super consciousness, the makif level of divine messages and guidance that are always coming to us. When we're that open and we're always receiving and we're united with receiving what's coming from Hashem, that's this level of unity that we're trying to strive for as much as possible. And when we go to that point, and or those points periodically throughout our life, because it's a building cycle. Obviously, we're always trying, we're always striving for those moments. They don't happen all the time. Maybe they even happen infrequently, but we still strive for them. The Alter Rebbe says that effort is very precious to God, and that God comes and assists us and helps rise us up, right, through our effort. So we come to the level of the service that's called Tamiti, my perfect one, which is a deeper meaning of my companion, which we described. It's deeper in that there's a harmony of divine presence in the world. In other words, now it's not just me and God. Now it's me with godliness shining through me, and I have work to do in this lower reality that we call darkness. But now I'm awake. Now I'm fully awake. Not just my heart is awake. My whole being is pulsating with a love and a connection like water and like fire, and striving for unification. And my avoda is to turn all of that and face it out into the world and reflect godliness into the world, so that we actually achieve a revelation of God's unity in the world all around us. This is a Jewish soul, right? The universe still has many imperfections, and there are many parts of it that are still dark and suffering and separated from the actual source that is godliness. If there remains even one suffering creature or soul or part of creation that's not perfected, that's not aware of God, so then the service is incomplete. Our work is not done. When we begin to work on completing it, we are turning our attention to the world and trying to demonstrate to the world the true oneness of godliness to the whole world, just in being who we are. This must be done in order to perfect all of reality and all of the souls that are related in reality. And actually, we have souls and sparks that have what's called a shaychus, a connection to us that we're meant to raise up. And through divine providence in life, we come to meet these people and situations and existence in our daily lives, where that's where we're operating, because that's where we have to raise up those godly souls and sparks. When Am Yisrael enters into this holy work of God's will for the world, God's ratzon for the world, then God calls us my perfect one. For the will of God is to realize his perfection in the world, and Am Yisrael, the Jews, are an actual part of God, and we are entrusted with this very holy task. This is the level of the Song of Songs that's called My Perfect One. You have a little bit more to go. We're doing very good. For then it says in the poem, Shir HaShirim, and my head is filled with dew. Just go to the last two levels, and my locks with the droplet of night. Okay, he's going to explain now the last two phrases in Shir HaShirim's in the poem of the discourse. Dew, unlike rain, does not depend upon evaporation from the ground below. Dew is symbolic of the gift of divine revelation that does not require arousal from below. We went through 4 levels. The highest level was really a very high level of avoda and striving through bitul and through connection and through actually allowing godliness to shine and manifest through us as much as possible. And it sounds big, but you know what? When you give tzedakah, when you call a person, when you reach out to do a mitzvah for somebody, all of those small actions are showing godliness in the world. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It just has to be our active, mindful, devoted investment of energy, of our whole being. We put ourselves into it, and that is the face of godliness shining, right? And so suddenly we come to a place of dew. Dew is the gift of divine revelation. There's a gift that happens. It comes from a hidden and transcendent source that no effort on our part could actually reach. After all of our effort, of our divine purpose and our mission, there's a gift of dew. When the soul reaches the most service it can do, the revelation of dew is drawn down from above as a gift. This is compared to a man walking from courtyard to courtyard, from chamber to chamber, where he must open the doors and the gateways between the chambers himself. Suddenly he is standing before a completely open gateway. From there, he requires nothing more than to enter the great hall, since he has passed through all the preceding gates by his own effort. The gift of dew is infinitely greater than the boundless pleasure of gazing at the king. Although the service of my dove expresses a state of bitul, the selfless pleasure of gazing is contracted and confined by the vision of the mind and heart. We're still involved in it. But the pleasure that is called dew is a level that represents God's gift of tainug, of pleasure, of divine pleasure, that's pashut, that's simple. It's just simply a gift. It's given, right? And it's selfless. It's not experienced by us on a physical level. It is a gift that completely comes into us and changes us from our effort. As it says when the divine groom calls to his bride in Shir HaShirim, my head is filled with dew. I am ready to give you the gift of dew from your awakening. Then we go to the last phrase, which just says, my locks with the droplets of night. Only with the most intense yet sublime might can infinite kindness and pleasure be conveyed to a finite recipient. Only with the most intense, sublime might, we're talking about God, all is possible by God, can the most intense kindness and pleasure be gifted to us, be blessed and bestowed upon us. We are finite. It's the infinite. This might affects a tzimtzum of God's infinite light, enabling it to enter finite vessels. Here, what's called the tzimtzum, the contraction of God's divine gift of giving, of dew, does not diminish the quality of the light. It only concentrates infinity to reach into finitude, into our lives. Tzimtzum is symbolized by hair. In order for the dew to permeate all souls and beings, small droplets of dew, small droplets of concentrated godly love and divinity and shefa must flow down the locks of the groom to his bride. The property of might is called the night, for it causes a contraction of light. This night, however, is the means for conveying the droplets of dew through the dripping down into the world, bringing it with it the dawn of redemption, the ultimate peace and freedom from all lower nights of exile. Now, the last phrase, as we can see, is quite mystical and poetic. When we've done all that we can, there is a level of godly influence called dew that is bestowed into reality from the infinite Godhead into finite reality, whether we want to call it the Geula Shlema, or we want to call it the dew coming through the locks and dripping down into reality. It is a transformation that is like the dawn of redemption. It's completely transformational, bringing with it a peace and a freedom from all the nights and the darkness of exile. This poem was about us being in exile, being asleep, but my heart is awakened to consciousness, and that consciousness builds and rises up and fills me and causes me holistically on many levels to strive to be the godly, empowered person that I am, from the essence of the core of my being through all of the levels that I strive to be. And in the end, the gift that's reciprocated from God, the dew, is what falls into reality and nourishes reality in a redemptive fashion, meaning that the infinite becomes fused into the finite. We are obviously all awaiting this, right? So there's one last piece I'm going to read you, which is at the very end of the book. Let's see if I can find it. I'm going to hold it up. I should have taken a picture of it. That would have been good. I'll take a picture and put it on the, if you can see it, it takes the phrase and then it's going to make a, what's called, I don't know if it's called an anagram. It's a shortening of the whole phrase. I'm going to read it to you. So from the poem, it takes all the Hebrew words and it takes the first letter of all the Hebrew words. And it says, a thought lies concealed in the initial letters of the 19 words of our verse from Shir Hashir. Keren Tal, Yodea Pella, V'reat Kodesh. A ray of dew knows the wonder of awe. A ray of dew, I'll just put that up here again. A ray of dew knows the wonder of awe. So there's a beautiful hidden message inside that whole verse. The verse from Shir Hashirim, if you have a Shir Hashirim at home, is 5-2. So you can look at it again. And we have actually done it. I didn't know whether we were actually going to be able to do it. Baruch Hashem, I am asleep, yet my heart is awake to the incredible love of Hashem that can be manifest through me in the world and that can be turned into a fire love and a service of great potency and sweetness. And in turn, when we try with all of our being to really become potent vessels for what is inborn in our heart and allow that fiery love and devotion and connection to go through all of the phases of love, then we also are able to give birth to divine goodness in the world, and Hashem reciprocates to us by bringing about this dew, the dew of redemption, the dawn of redemption. And we're waiting for that, and that will be very, very sweet, and will really water all of the planet with tremendous beauty of godliness.